Big news roundup today, a few quick stories first. Season 13 will be ending on New Year's Eve, December 31st at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And the next season starting up, Season 14, is scheduled to launch 2 hours after 13 just finishes by 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. 2 hours? What's the goal in this? What are they even doing with that time? I'm a bit confused. By Season 20, will there be a 5-minute break between seasons? So who knows on that one. Moving on to other possibly ill-fated decisions. Overwatch Contenders, which is the Tier 2 Esports divisions, as of today, will force you to sign in with your Battle.net account before entering the chat. They go on to explain that this is essentially to cut down on toxicity, or in their words, creating a more positive viewing experience. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and I actually don't think this is being made as big of a deal as it actually is. You may argue that they're doing this to appease sponsors who don't want their brands associated with people spamming tryhard7 or have confusion about what Pepe the Frog means in a gaming context. And that might be true, but the impact that I think this is going to have has been vastly understated, especially when we start to consider this potentially going on to work on the Overwatch League channel, because when you're dealing with numbers that big, like viewer bases of 100,000 concurrent, not everyone has a Blizzard account that's watching, or even if they do, might not go through the hassle of setting it up on their Twitch profile. To be clear, I don't like Twitch chat. Unless it's in a smaller stream and I want to talk to a streamer I know or have a small discussion with someone. The whole spamming emotes thing, I feel just too old to understand or care, but that's my personal opinion. Gamer culture in general really likes Twitch chat. And having this full-on papers, please hoop you have to jump through before you can enter the chat, I think will drastically reduce engagement. And yes, clean it up, but also disincentivize a lot of users who want to engage with the Twitch content casually and maybe don't even own Overwatch or have a Blizzard account. I would advise that the Overwatch League do not do this because it's a big deal when Overwatch League is one of the top viewed streams on the entire site, and then they're tapping into sort of the mainstream crowd, which other esports, like for example, when the CSGO major is on, just recently they had one with like 1 million concurrents. It's like 10 or 20 times the average player base of the game. Gaming culture is completely interlinked online, and having this almost elitist type approach to it to try to ban out copy pastas and emote spam that you don't like, I think it's a big mistake. And I hate Twitch chat. I'd love it to be a place to intellectually engage with the complexities of the esport, but that's an utterly ridiculous expectation. And worse yet, I don't know, I could be way off base with this, and I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree. But moving on to other news, Mark Cuban is a famous businessman. He also owns sports teams and is probably the type of guy you'd think of when it's the top 0.1% that has a lot of money and influence in the world. And he tweeted out an article critical of pro gamers who burn out in their 20s, being forced to retire young due to a extremely competitive industry that takes no prisoners. Now, the article is based on another article coming from a CBSN original documentary explaining the lifestyle and goings-on of pro gamers. To be fair, I watched and liked the doc. It was pretty good and actually a lot more fair than these articles seem to be. But regardless, this stems the argument that these young players being forced to grind to compete, to even have a chance to make tons of money, is leading to a staggering amount of physical and mental damages, which somewhat should go without saying, but this prompted the Overwatch League commissioner Nate Nancer to respond saying working 8 to 10 hour days doesn't seem out of the ordinary to be the best in the world at literally anything, does it, Mark? Goes on to say Overwatch League teams have amazing support infrastructure to help their players manage those schedules and be at their best on game day. It's not really any different than basketball, and Mark Cuban owns a basketball team. Mark Cuban responds by saying, how often does the game change? How much time is required to adapt and perfect a team after a change? And do all teams globally approach practice time the same? I'm far from Overwatch League smart, but look at the Brigida change. The NBA doesn't make meta changes mid-season. Oh, even Mark Cuban wants to delete Brig. Now, this back and forth spurred off a lot of notable personalities that you should know about chiming in, and one of them was VP Esports Kevin Hitt, who said, I love the Overwatch League, and I think these guys are doing the best so far of any league, but the reality is the teams are practicing 12 to 14 hours a day for 6 days a week. I would say the majority are doing this. And Mark Cuban responds by saying, that's how guys burn out. In my opinion, they last longer now because the money has improved and the teams are more proactive and professional, but working 70 hours a week in season when you can quickly lose your spot is super stressful. Now, a lot of these claims that are getting tossed around were mentioned in the CBSN documentary. Esports journalist Richard Lewis featured on there with some interviews talking about the fact that there is no players union like there is in the other real sports to sort of be a counteracting agent to the interests of the money-making entities like the organizations and the league itself. And that's how you can get to these crazy work requirements, which I will comment on eventually, but let's get through the rest of the quotes before that. The GM of the Houston Outlaws, Flame, responded by saying, "I definitely think the 12 to 14 hours practiced is baseless. If team management allows their players to practice that long, that's a problem with the management, not with the league or concept of it. As far as meta shifts go, it's no different than having to practice against a different defensive style or offensive line each week in football. You adapt and go." So at the very least, that first point of extreme work hours is kind of contested here, but I think we already all publicly knew that teams like the Shanghai Dragons were practicing like 12 hours a day during their 0-40 remarkable, or let's say unremarkable, winless run to make esports history as the least winningest team ever. But the other point about the meta swaps is also an interesting subject in its own right. Mark Cuban is describing that teams have to practice even more because of the potential massive shape-ups that happen in the blink of an eye if a character gets patched to be less effective or nerfed. Now, GM for the Houston Outlaws, Flame, discounted this, but esports journalist Thorin remarked back, "Yeah, but your middle linebacker doesn't suddenly have totally different physical attributes and abilities from week to week, because of course there is no major patch change for the physics of the natural world. You're largely playing the same game even if the rules are a bit different." Flame responds that he prefers to think of different heroes and playstyles in their macro sense as a formation like you have in different sports. But I would go one step further with an explanation that I think makes this even more clear. Whenever you change how a hero operates in a game, instead of thinking abstractly to the laws of the universe, something that's easier to grip is like in basketball, if a 3-point shot was buffed to give you 10 points instead, all of a sudden, a huge portion of the game is essentially irrelevant, and the game completely becomes about taking those long-range shots. The problem with Overwatch is that we shift between being Widow meta to being Goats meta. We go over the entirety of the Overwatch League, with NYXL being by far the best team, partially because they have Jonak, who's the best Zen by far, and then all of a sudden the patch changes, and I think it's a bit disingenuous to not see how drastic that these different styles of play are, and how they can benefit or hurt teams and players that were stronger in a different meta. Do you remember the playoff meta? Teams weren't playing Zen at all, and instead putting that player on Tracer or Roadhog, and Jonak was average at best. For a pro player, obviously. Not sensational on those characters at all, and their team struggled. Now, I think the glaring counter-argument to all of this is that these players are professionals, and these claims of the sky is falling with player health is just sort of the norm with everything in the entertainment industry, which, yes, esports is a part of. These same things can be a problem for Twitch streamers, YouTubers, or anyone trying to make it in any competitive industry. Actual sports, becoming an actress, if you want to be a pop star, basically everything, requires a shocking amount of dedication and hard work. This is less of a problem of esports and more just the nature of the society that we live in. Anyone in the public eye that has an awesome job as an athlete or an actor or whatever, they have to work incredibly hard to be any good at the thing that they do. And there's a lot of sacrifice in order to achieve that. And with a lot of people worried about the esports industry essentially treating humans as disposable parts of the machine, I would remind everyone that there's many other much easier industries in the world to get into. Jobs where you do get to just clock in and then clock out, and you don't have to worry about performing highly or constant improvement. A lot of jobs are like that. So to the few people that do get themselves involved with these incredibly competitive industries, I think the reality is that if it doesn't work for you, try to do something else. Are gamers blowing out their wrists and having back problems from sitting at a desk for 10 to 12 hours a day? Yes. And there's workers on assembly lines and coal mines and waitresses with sore feet. Turns out every profession puts a lot of wear and tear on your body. So it is definitely important that we worry about our own well-being and the well-being of each other and try to look after each other and ease that pressure whenever possible. But it should be no shock to anyone that when you turn even something that's supposed to be fun like gaming into actual work, that there's going to be side effects. And then just the last point that I want to sneak in here at the end, this entire premise of rotating metas really gets snipped in the bud when we start to think about hero bans for Overwatch. Even as Flame said in this tweet, the fundamental problem with Overwatch is the fact that no matter what patch it is, there will always be a combination of 6 heroes that will be deemed broken or optimal. One hero ban per team would open up so many different compositions and make the game so enjoyable to watch again. This thread goes further with Custa vehemently agreeing. We of course agree as well. I saw this tweet asking a reasonable question in the thread. Do you really think hero bans would force diversity instead of introducing its own set of meta of bans? Jane almost indirectly answers this question in a recent tweet saying teams want to protect their own weaknesses and ban out the opponent's strengths. Jane goes on to say this is why, based on experimentation, I found that both teams protecting a hero before a round makes this system even better and more competitive. It is also conveniently the rule set I'm using for my January tournaments, which I am super stoked to check out. I'll be studying those VODs and hopefully even making some content on it myself if anything interesting comes up. But I think for those of you that tune into those tournaments or keep an eye on this as it develops, the truth is the reason why this actually creates diversity is that we're putting control of the meta, an on-off switch if you will, in the hands of individual players and groups of players in a team, rather than them be subject to the will of our Lord and Savior Jeff Kaplan as he crafts the balance patch as it stands. So if you're not a GOATS team in the GOATS meta, well, prepare to lose a lot of matches. And what the bans do is allow these individuals to be able to carve out their own identity within a given patch, rather than being forced to conform. You need bans to see other heroes get introduced. I said this in a tweet recently as well, further explaining this idea. I see a lot of people scared if we're banning out staple heroes like Ryan, Winston, D.Va. They start to exclaim that this would just utterly break the game. Compared to what exactly? Compared to being forced to play GOATS or forced to play Dive? No, that's not how this works. In fact, what happens is teams will ban and protect based on their strengths and weaknesses and how they counteract with the opponent they have, targeting their opponent and trying to outmatch them. In fact, instead, we start to see heroes that never get played in substitution for certain roles. When D.Va's banned, we start to see a lot more Roadhog and Wrecking Ball, who are 2 very fun heroes to watch that barely see any playtime. The fact of the matter is, hero bans are required to ever get diversity out of Overwatch. It will never happen without it, which if you don't want variety, that's fine, but I think most players and viewers of the game think it would be a big upgrade over seeing the same mirror matches nonstop for a few months till the game gets patched and there's an entirely new set of mirror matches for us to watch. Hey, but that's just one man's opinion. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying our content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link in the description is our Twitter. We'd love to interact with you on there, so come pop us a follow. Let us know your thoughts. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.